Welcome to this live podcast documentary on World War I. The historians reading to you today are Matt Nowakowski and Tyron Hawkins. World War I was a complex battle fought between the dates July 28, 1914 and November 11, 1918. There were a total of 32 nations involved in the war, separated into two sides known as the Allies and the Central Powers. The major Allied powers include the countries Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and the United States. The United States joined the Allied powers in 1917 after the country could no longer stay neutral because of Woodrow Wilson having a plan in the Proclamation of Neutrality and many other reasons involving kinship and propaganda. The Allies were in total composed of 25 nations. You will now hear from a 107-year-old World War I vet who recalls his own experiences during the war.
It's October 20th, 2003, and we're in Yakima, Washington. And would you state your name, please?
William J. Lake.
Okay, and when were you born?
October the 30th, 1895.
And where were you born?
Missouri.
So what was it like then when you got to the front? What did it look like?
Well, I'll tell you, just bullets zipping around all the time.
Huh.
You just never knew when you was going to get hit, but I was lucky, as I said. Now, another guy, I was sitting out of the bank, and the sniper shot him instead of me.
You were sitting next to each other.
Yeah.
This is
Those are more than 2 feet apart. He picked him instead of me. He killed him, of course.
You were just sitting out on a bank somewhere? A river bank?
Yeah, no, inland. It's inland.
Oh, like near a trench?
Yeah.
Huh.
And they got him. They found him. They found the sniper and
Oh, they killed him?
And, oh yeah, they didn't take him prisoner. Not the sniper, no.
What were
He
you?
was up in the tree and they found him. And the other man he fell out of the tree dead. That's all it was. So
They shot him in the tree.
yeah.
Were you talking to the fellow when he was shot?
Oh yeah, this other guy was sitting there talking.
Huh.
Yeah.
You and he were.
picked him instead of me, and I was lucky. That's all.
Were you? Was this at night or in the daytime?
Exactly.
Daytime. You're just sitting there talking to him 2 feet away, and a sniper shot him.
I sat beside him, and he picked him instead of me.
What? Did you get down as soon as you heard the shot?
Well, I moved right down. Because I had no idea where he was from. I didn't know, but they found him, and he was up in the tree, and they let him out, and he tumbled out of the tree.
Huh.
Because they didn't take a sniper prisoner.
No.
No.
They killed him.
That's how.
They were very hard feeling about that.
So they were great. They'd shoot you in the back just so they wouldn't the face, you know. They didn't care long as they got you.
It is truly amazing to listen to that man talk about his experiences during World War I and share his knowledge. We will now begin back to the regular show. The countries that fought against the Allies were the Central Powers. The Central Powers consisted of the countries Germany, the Austria-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. This side of the war was very sloppy due to everyone not being on the same page and organized.
World War I was started due to being a direct result of the death of Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914 by Serbian nationalists. Other than the assassination of the Archduke, many believe that there were 4 main reasons of the outbreak of World War I. The first and main reason of the outbreak of World War I has to do with nationalism. Many at this time were starting to develop strong nations housing people of pride for their country. The idea of nation and the sense of belonging associated with nationality created much pride and arrogance in many situations. In simpler terms, nationalism created defensive people with large hotheads ready to explode at any second if their country was bashed. The second main reason for the start of World War I has to do with imperialism. Imperialism is a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. As soon as technology was available, many countries started to move into other areas of the world to colonize and create large empires. This created a total desire for power and control that happens in many instances. Another reason historians say World War I started was because of militarism. Militarism is the belief or desire of a government or people that a country should maintain a strong military capability and be prepared to use it aggressively to defend or promote national interests. During this time, nations, especially Europe, continued to expand and build in their armies. What happens is, countries constantly see other countries growing. Their armies are getting threatened, leaving them to add on to their army and make it larger than ever before. Having all these countries growing and expanding their armies at alarming rates creates tension and mistrust among nations. This leaves the question, who is really safe? The last cause of World War I, excluding the assassination of Archduke, is the lack of international organization. Prior to World War I, there was no governing organization to instill rules and regulations for all of the international affairs. There was no United Nations to enforce the rules like we have today. The only source of international organization was the Hague Court of Arbitration, and the country only had to comply with it if they wanted to. The international relations of this time consisted of individual treaties forged between nations that were sometimes contradicted with treaties with other nations. This led to no control leading to countries doing whatever they thought was in the best interest of them.
There were many technological advancements that came about during World War I. Different and new weapons were created to fight the war more effectively. These all led to better ways of fighting wars and arming all militaries so that they are capable of protecting and defending their nation. Some examples of technological advancements are tanks, flamethrowers, poison gas, tracer bullets, interrupter gear, air traffic control, depth charges, hydrophones, aircraft carriers, pilotless drones, mobile x-ray machines, sanitary napkins, and lastly, long-range missiles. During the war, machine guns reinforced mass rifle fire from the defending trenches, leaving attackers demolished by thousands before they could even get out of their trenches. A solution presented itself in the form of an automobile, which took the world by storm after 1900. Powered by a small internal combustion engine burning diesel or gas, a heavily armored vehicle could advance even in the face of overwhelming small arms fire. If you add some serious guns and replace the wheels with armored tracks to handle rough terrain, the tank was born. Poison gas was used by both sides with devastating results during the Great War. The Germans pioneered the large-scale use of chemical weapons with a gas attack on Russian positions on January 31st, 1915 during the Battle of Bulimov, but low temperatures froze the poison in the shells. The first successful use of the chemical weapons occurred on April 22, 1915, when the Germans sprayed chlorine gas from large cylinders towards trenches held by French colonial troops. The Germans were slow to follow up with infantry attacks. The gas dissipated and the Allied defenses were restored. Before long, of course, the Allies were using poison gas too, and over the course of the war, both sides resorted to increasingly treacherous compounds to beat gas masks, another new invention. Thus, the overall result was a huge increase in misery for not much change in the strategic situation, which happened to be a recurrent theme throughout the war. During World War I, the role of airplanes and how they were used changed greatly. At first, planes were only used for sport, but people started to realize that not only could airplanes be useful, but they could also even influence the outcome of the war greatly. Soon the war was filled with blimps, planes, and tethered balloons. By the end of the war, planes became a symbol of fear, but they were not always treated with such respect. In the time leading up to the war, the general feeling about planes was they were a sneaky, unfair tactic that should not be used in warfare. The world soon started to realize the effectiveness of planes in war and how the control of the skies could influence the outcome. Although the French were the first to have a working, conscripting air force and to license flyers, their trust in airplanes still was not up to par. Soon all countries in the war effort had their own little air force, built hangars, and started to train pilots. The first bombing occurred in November 1911. The first pilot drones was developed by the U.S. Navy in 1916 and 1917 by two inventors, Elmer Sperry and Peter Hewitt. who originally designed it as an unmanned aerial bomb, which was essentially a prototype cruise missile, measuring just 18.5 feet across with a 12 horsepower motor. The Hewitt-Sperry automatic aircraft weighed 175 pounds and was stabilized and directed by gyroscopes and a barometer to determine the altitude. The first unmanned flight in history occurred on Long Island on March 6, 1918. In the end, the targeting technique was to point and fly, but was too imprecise for it to be useful against ships during the war. Further development by attempting to integrate remote radio controls continued for several years after the war until the Navy lost interest in 1925. Long-range missiles allowed for the militaries to attack from wherever they wanted to. This cut down on up-close confrontation and reduced the number of deaths on the side of the military actually firing the missile. Even though this was a very expensive project and weapon in the war, it was also very beneficial and effective. A new style or approach to fighting wars emerged during World War I. This was called trench warfare. This was the first time in war in which this style of fighting was utilized. Trench warfare is when the soldiers would dig themselves a hole for shelter, cover, and support. The trenches offered more protection but also allowed for the battles to drag on and in the long run led to more casualties. The trenches also created a very large problem due to the soldiers using chemical warfare, making it very hard for people to escape and which led to many deaths. Chlorine gas was also used against enemy troops, and the gas became more concentrated the closer to the ground, making the trenches dangerous even with a gas mask. Another way of fighting also emerged during the Great War. U-boats were used, which are also known as submarines. Submarines were enacted to counteract the forces of the British naval fleet. The most famous way, though, submarines were used was to attack neutral American cargo vessels, which was one of the main reasons why the United States joined in arms against the Central Powers. To wrap things up, there were a total of over 38 million military and civilian casualties at the end of the war. On behalf of the Allied powers, there were a total of 42,188,810 total mobilized forces. There were 5,142,631 killed, 12,800,706 wounded. There were 4,121,090 missing persons and prisoners. And lastly, 22,062,427 total casualties. On behalf of the Central Powers, there were a total of 22,850,000 total mobilized forces. There were 3,386,200 killed, 8,388,448 wounded, 3,629,829 missing persons and prisoners, and lastly, 15,404,477 total casualties. Overall, the war in total resulted in 65,038,810 total mobilized forces, 8,528,831 killed, 21,189,154 wounded, 7,750,919 missing persons and prisoners, and a total of 37,466,904 total casualties.
In the end, World War I, or the Great War, was supposed to be the end to all other wars. Unfortunately, this was not the case, leading to the world to go to war again 30 years later. Germany elected the Nazi into power in the 1920s after suffering from a depression and crippling economic and military restrictions. World War II began officially when the invasions of Poland on September 1st, 1939. The Holocaust occurred under Nazi rule, claiming the lives of 11 million Jews, Gypsies, homosexuals, communists, invalids, and other non-essential people. Lastly, the atomic bomb was dropped twice on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, in an effort to end the Pacific Front.
I hope everyone enjoyed this show. To wrap things up, you will be listening to multiple interviews with real World War I vets about their experiences during the war.
What I did remember was on the eve of the battle, the night before they were to go over at the dawn the next morning was the combined armaments all crashing out together, and the whole earth trembled. The lines holding down the balloon were shaking, and you could feel the vibrations coming up through the earth, up through your limbs, all through your body. You were all of a tremor just by artillery fire only. Not so much perhaps the crashing of the shells as the gunfire at rear, all concentrating in one wild blast of gunfire. It was shattering. The whole ground trembled, and you felt sorry for anybody within half a mile of wherever they were firing at. It must have been terrible for them.
Captain Neville was commanding B Company, one of our two assaulting companies, and a few days before the Battle of the Somme, he came to me with a suggestion that as he and his men were all equally ignorant of what their conduct would be when they got into action, he thought it might be helpful, as he had 400 yards to go and knew that it would be covered by machine gun fire, it would be helpful if he could furnish each platoon with a football and allow them to kick it forward and follow it. And that was the beginning of the idea, and I sanctioned that on condition that he and his officers really kept command of the units and didn't allow it to develop into a rush after the ball. They'd got to keep, just if a man came across the football, he could kick it forward, but he mustn't chase after it. And I think myself that it did help them enormously. It took their minds off it. But they suffered terribly. Neville and his second captain were both killed, and his company sergeant major.
At 7 o'clock in the morning, come on, up you go. Well, when I got up to the front line, I was astonished. The plain fact was that the front line as we knew it didn't exist. It had been bombed, it had been shattered by the German shell fire, and so many of our chaps were already dead. I saw two poor chaps, they were brothers. Their legs were sticking out from the mould, sticking out from the fallen trench. We realised they were two brothers. And then our company sergeant major, he was going over the top. There's the attack the German front line. Over you go. Well, over we went.
Practically all our officers had been decimated. They were wiped out. Most of the NCOs too. And quite a lot of men lay dead in the thing, with the shell fire, of course. And then 7:30, Mr. Morris pulled out his revolver, blew his whistle and said, "Over." And as he said it, a bullet hit him straight between the eyes and killed him. I went over with all the other boys. Well, the barbed wire that was supposed to have been demolished had only been cut in places. Just a gap here, a gap there, a gap further on. Everybody made for the gap in order to get through. Well, the Germans, of course, there were supposed to be no Germans at all in their front line. We'd annihilated them according to the theory. Actually, they were down in the ground in concrete shelters. They just wound up their guns on automatic affairs and fired at these breaches in the wire. And of course they just mowed us down. And it seemed to me eventually I was just one man left. I couldn't see anybody at all. All I could see was men lying dead, men screaming, men on the barbed wire with the bowels hanging down, shrieking. And I thought, what can I do? I was just alone in a hell of fire and smoke and stink.
Well, on July the 1st, we were going over the top. My feelings of that morning was, after all the months of waiting, looking forward to the very day it was happening. When I'm at Lewis Canteen, I was thinking, well, this is what we've waited for, And this is what we wanted. We were going over the top. And we thought at that time, after all the training, and it was a cushy sector beforehand, we thought, well, we should be all right here. 0 hour comes, all right. You hear the whistles going down the line, over the top. Everybody's watches synchronized. I take my Lewiston team over. We get on fairly well, until I realized how they were lagging behind. Going over the top is not going over a carpet floor or going over a road. It's going over a place that's been pockmarked for nearly 12 months of shell fire.
It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there.